Wonder Woman and a lack of legacy. Now, I was on live with my buddy JT yesterday, and somebody asked a compelling question about legacy characters and why the ones from Wonder Woman weren't really highlighted or talked about in a way that a lot of the other ones were. I'd like to apologise because I can't remember exactly the username of the person who asked that, so if that was you, come to the front. And the incredibly short answer on that is that it's twofold. The first part is that Wonder Woman's legacy characters are a lot more modern than a lot of the older DC superhero families. And the second part is that Wonder Woman legacy characters have actually largely not existed within the Wonder Woman realm, but rather to give a female or Wonder presence on young teams. Now, before we get into the extended answer, I would like to establish that there are three main forms of legacies when it comes to superhero characters. The first one is the legacy which is introduced as a sidekick, so think Richard Grayson, Roy Harper. This form of legacy does often grow into the second form of legacy, which is the person who takes on the mantle. So for instance, if you look at the Green Lanterns, they don't necessarily have sidekicks, but people like Kyle are introduced to take the mantle from another individual or to share that mantle with them. The third form of legacy is the partner. So these are characters who are introduced who, rather than being a sidekick, are put on more even footing and generally aren't interested on taking on the mantle long term. So we're looking at original Barbara Gordon Batgirl, we're looking at Batwoman, we are looking at Supergirl. These characters were introduced very heavily within a specific pre-existing brand, but they weren't ever meant to be a sidekick to the character that they were playing alongside. But you will notice for the most part that all three of those legacy types tend to be introduced in the comic book or stories centering the main character, so to speak, and they tend to have identities which begin with that connection. And that was not what happened with Wonder Girl. So it's worth noting that the original Wonder Girl was Diana herself. When Robert Kanigher in Silver Age introduced what he called the Impossible Tales, he brought Diana from different stages of her life together to play, to work, and to fight together. So all throughout the Silver Age, we had Wonder Girl, Wonder Tot, and Wonder Woman, and that was all just Diana. Donna was introduced fully and properly as her own separate character in a Teen Titans story which was published in 1965, which is anywhere from 5 to 25 years later than the first legacy character of any of the other main superhero families, really. Donna wouldn't get her backstory sort of clarified for the first time until 1969, which was already a year or so into Wonder Woman's Bronze Age. Now, I understand that Bronze Age generally starts later for other characters. When it comes to Wonder Woman, for reasons I can get into at some other point, Bronze Age starts with the O'Neill and Sikowski run. But when it comes to Donna and Diana's connection, once Donna was clarified to be somebody who was raised by Hippolyta, we still didn't really regularly see Donna in Wonder Woman comics to any capacity until 1990. It is also worth noting that George Perez, who got Wonder Woman back on track in post-crisis and established large swaths of what we view as the character now, was also party to the new Teen Titans. He had a lot of control over Donna as he wrote and drew the run where she centered as an adult. But because it took over 4 years for Donna's backstory to be clarified and Wonder Girl was briefly showing up in the mainline Wonder Woman comics written by Kanigher, there was some grey space where we're still not entirely certain if the Wonder Girl in some of the comics is specifically Donna or is in fact Diana. Now, Robert Kanigher's Wonder Woman was largely so bland that there's not even really aspects of unique personality that you can see within the Wonder Girl there to tell whether or not it's eventually meant to be Donna or if it's just Diana. Dependent on the origin story you want to go by, Donna was either somebody who was raised by Hippolyta with Diana occasionally stopping in as a big sister, or a clone of Diana who was made and then imprisoned and tortured for years and sort of put through a whole bunch of universes. It's a long story. And whilst Donna has stepped up when Diana has been out of the picture for one question or another, she's never really been presented as somebody who is intended to become Wonder Woman. And then we get to Cassie, who is the closest to a traditional origin character, so to speak, that Diana has. She is 1 year younger than me, being introduced in 1996. And it's worth noting that she did get her origin story and her establishment in the Wonder Woman comics before being largely relegated to Team Comics in first Young Justice and then Teen Titans. It took us until 2006 to get a solo comic about a Wonder Girl, and that was primarily Cassie's book, and it was only 6 issues long, being a mini. But Cassie actually largely was not trained up by Diana. She was largely trained up by what could be considered another Wonder Woman legacy character if people hadn't so heavily tied her into the background. That's right, the Wonder Woman of the 90s, Artemis Grace, Artemis Banner McDowell, was the individual most responsible for training Cassie up with first her godly gifts and then her godly powers once it was retconned that she was the daughter of Zeus. Part of Helena Sandsmark's agreement to let Cassie do what she wanted to do, which was become a superhero and be like Diana and help people out, was that she get properly trained and receive support, and as a result, Artemis ended up mentoring her and training her. And when we talk about the damage caused by New 52 to various characters, I do not think you can understate just how much harm it did to Cassie. First of all, it took the origin that she had in terms of her powers and her complex relationship with the gods and handed that to Diana, who was very ill-suited for the story of the child of Zeus. I know some folks aren't fond of Cassie being the child of Zeus, but I actually quite like it because I think it pushes against the whole aspect of, oh, blood is destiny, because that's not the case. Cassie chose to be who she is, and she is nothing like her father. There's also a lot of problems with how overtly sexualized Cassie is in New 52 for a 16-year-old just in general, but also the fact that Cassie was somebody who traditionally did not like skirts and did not feel comfortable in particularly feminine clothing. She was a scruffy kid who is the head of her school's archaeology club and cared an awful lot more about helping people than anything else. She's not elegant and graceful in the way that Diana or even Donna are. But because New 52 also erased and completely rebuilt Diana and the Amazons from the ground up, the Banner Migdal were not really included, and so Artemis didn't show up until that Outlaws book. And when she showed up in that Outlaws book, she was very much presented more so as an outsider than she was an active part of the Amazon community. And her and Cassie didn't really interact, and when they did, it was somewhat antagonistic. But because that reboot did entirely reset and erase every aspect of every character, you went back to Diana having absolutely no connection or no concept of any of her supporting cast in a way that didn't happen, for instance, with the Batband. New 52 Bat comics still had Tim and Jason and Babs and a whole host of varying other pre-existing characters where they sort of added in or recreated backstories which were similar enough for fans. That level of consideration was not given to the Wonder Brand. Then we get to 2020 and DC Future State. Now, Yara Flor is perhaps the first Wonder Girl who was sort of immediately given the space, but I do think plenty of balls were dropped. Joelle Jones had a really tough personal situation which impacted her ability to work on the book, and Indigenous Brazilian voices were just not heard enough in the creation and usage of their varying myths and characters. I will say that I do think that Yara Flor is perhaps the first Wonder Girl that DC put any marketing or focus behind. They did attempt to make her happen, they did give her her own book, and they gave her her own space. They just perhaps should have been workshopping those ideas a little bit more. And then we hit the latest attempt, which is Trinity, aka Lizzie Prince. Now, for a range of reasons, the average Wonder Woman fan is not a fan of Lizzie. You've taken a character who has traditionally been very, very clear in why she eschews both motherhood and marriage and made her a mother with absolutely no support system and no partner to raise that child with. Once again, this time they have actually given her marketing and given her her own book, but it is worth noting that the first issue of that said book did not even crack the top 50 in terms of sales. A lot of folks aren't really interested in learning about Lizzie at this point in time. And I think, deliberate or not, the way that the creator of Lizzie was very inflammatory in his comments about the Wonder Girls in trying to sell his new version did not set things up well. Maybe one day we'll get that Donna Troy solo.